Hey guys, what's up? John here from fly8mikealpha.com, and today we're going to be talking about 8s on pylons. So that commercial pilot maneuver where you go ahead and slalom around 2 points and basically make a figure 8 around them while keeping your wingtip directly aligned on those points at all times. So rather than inscribing perfectly round circles like turns about a point or steep spirals, now we're actually just slaloming around them, trying to keep our wingtip directly aligned on those points at all times. Now, before we get too far in depth into this maneuver and take a look at what it looks like in the airplane, we have to figure out one key thing before we go out and practice this. What is our pivotal altitude for that day? So where are we going to start out at altitude-wise doing this maneuver? Now, pivotal altitude is always going to be talked about in AGL values, above ground level values. So how many feet above the ground do you want to start this maneuver? Pivotal altitude is ultimately the altitude that you're going to be flying at that's going to keep that wingtip directly on that point at all times. So pivotal altitude will change with your speed. Now, that speed would be ground speed. So if you have a tailwind or a headwind, it's going to affect it a little bit. And of course, if your airspeed changes, that would also affect your ground speed. But we do know what airspeed we're going to start this maneuver at. It'll be just below maneuvering speed. And we do know what the winds aloft are going to be doing projected at that time. So for example here, let's go ahead and use the ends of runway 13 and 31, and let's say the winds are coming out of the west. So we're going to begin this with the wind at our tail as we come across at this 45-degree angle between our 2 points. We basically split between them. We're going to roll to the left first because that's the easiest one for us to see to start out this maneuver. We're going to bank just enough to put our wingtip directly on that point. And then we're going to hold it there, varying our bank to keep it as close to that point as possible, and varying our altitude. Now to first find our pivotal altitude, we're going to want to take our ground speed, square it, and then divide by 11.3 if we're using knots. If we happen to be doing our ground speed in miles per hour, then we want to go ahead and divide by 15 to find our pivotal altitude. So we're going to do everything in knots today. So say our airspeed's about 100 knots, and we have wind coming out of the west around 10 knots or so, and we find that to be a 5-knot tailwind component to start out this maneuver, so we have a ground speed of 105 knots. So 105 times 105 divided by 11.3 gives us 975. So roughly 975 feet is our pivotal altitude to start the day off. That's what altitude we want to begin this maneuver at, and then roll into our left bank accordingly. So as we come between these 2 points, we split right in between them at a 45-degree angle, we dip our left wing down, we try to connect our left wing to that point on the ground visually. So we're trying to keep that left wing tip right on that point throughout this entire maneuver, varying our bank to do so, so never covering it up by shallowing too much, never making the bank too steep and drawing the wingtip away from the point. Imagine a string being attached to your wingtip, to the point that you're making a circle around, and you want to keep that string as short as possible. You don't want to break that string by banking too much, banking too shallow, or letting the point get behind or in front of you. Now what you'll find here is the point starts to move ahead of or behind the wingtip. And to account for that, when the point moves in front of us, simply push forward, go get it, and when the point moves behind you, simply pull back, slow the airplane down, and let the point catch up. That is the simplest terms I can explain this maneuver to you in. If the point is in front of you, push forward, go get it. If the point's behind you, pull back, let it catch up to you. What you're ultimately doing when you push forward and pull back is you're changing your altitude and you're changing your airspeed, which changes your ground speed. When ground speed changes, our pivotal altitude changes. And so let's say our point is moving ahead of us. Well, what that's telling us is that pivotal altitude is decreasing, and we have to descend to meet it. As we descend to meet our point, we're picking up speed, thus raising pivotal altitude, and pivotal altitude and our aircraft somehow meet in the middle there, and at that exact moment when our wingtip is directly on the point, our aircraft is at the exact pivotal altitude. Then if we continue to speed up, pivotal altitude is going to keep increasing while our aircraft altitude decreases. And we're going to have to counter that by increasing our pitch, climbing back up, and meeting pivotal altitude again. Now you can go through these huge oscillations, and when I did this mock-up in the sim, I didn't do a very good job of doing this very smoothly. In the real airplane, you're not going to make huge corrections, but I wanted you to see exactly what kind of corrections I was making in the simulator here. So I made pretty aggressive pitch changes up and down and pretty aggressive altitude changes of several hundred feet. In the real world, you may only need to vary your altitude plus or minus 100 feet throughout this whole maneuver with just a few degrees of pitch nose up or nose down. The key factor into how big of corrections you have to make is how early your eyesight can detect the point moving behind or in front of the wingtip. So if you detect any motion between the wingtip and your point, try to correct for that right away. If you see it going behind you, go ahead and pull back, slow the airplane down, increase your rate of turn, increase your altitude, meet pivotal altitude that's above you, and then if you see that point going ahead of you, lower your nose, speed up, go down to meet pivotal altitude, increase your airspeed, decrease your rate of turn. Note we're decreasing our rate of turn or increasing our rate of turn not by varying our bank angle even here. We're only varying our bank angle to keep that wingtip on the point. We're varying our rate of turn via our pitch and our speed. The slower we go with a given bank angle, the higher the rate of turn is, and the faster we go with a given bank angle, the wider our rate of turn is, or the slower the rate of turn. You can perform this maneuver back and forth all day long between your two pylons. Your two pylons should preferably be about a mile or so apart, depending on your speed, to give you enough distance to fly wings level and roll out and cross the line between them at a 45-degree angle between each turn. It's key to note here that you really shouldn't be messing with power throughout this maneuver at all. You're just changing your altitude and your airspeed with pitch. Power should stay constant, so make sure the airplane enters the maneuver at or below maneuvering speed with the power set and the airplane trimmed to fly at a certain altitude hands off so it's not accelerating or decelerating on you. What the DPE or the examiner is ultimately looking for here is that first, you select pylons and you clear the area. You determine the appropriate approximate pivotal altitude, and he'll probably talk with you about that on your oral exam portion. Select suitable pylons that will permit straight and level flight between the pylons, so about a mile apart or so. A 5,000, 6,000 foot runway can work pretty well if there's no other traffic in the area. Correctly enter the maneuver at the appropriate altitude and airspeed. Establishing correct bank angle for the conditions, so vary your bank angle to keep your wingtip on that point, but don't exceed 40 degrees of bank during this maneuver. So it should be somewhere between 20 and 40 degrees of bank. Usually 20 to 30 works quite well. If you're having to use steeper bank angles, it's because you're too close to your point, and you need to choose points that maybe are further apart due to your speed. So maybe choose points that are 1.5 miles apart or something like that, so that you can be a little further away and making a shallower bank angle to connect your wingtip to your pylon or to your point on the ground. Make sure that you apply corrections so that line of sight reference remains right on the pylon, and divide your attention between accurate coordinated airplane control and outside visual references. So basically make sure you keep looking outside the airplane as much as possible, and make sure you're using rudder to keep the airplane coordinated, not using rudder to cheat and yaw the airplane and try to keep your wingtip on your point. That will totally ruin the maneuver for you. Make sure you maintain the pylon position using the appropriate pivotal altitude, varying your pitch, and avoid slips and skids. The common errors here with this maneuver are to select pylons that are either too close together, start off with the wrong pivotal altitude, be messing with power throughout the maneuver, using rudder, trying to swing your wings around and line them up when you should be using pitch and changing your pivotal altitude instead, and oftentimes just starting the maneuver too close to the original pylon that requires too steep of a degree of bank to start out the maneuver, where you eventually exceed the 40-degree limit. Remember, you can practice this maneuver in any airplane. It doesn't have to be the airplane you're going to use on your commercial pilot Checkride. It just has to be any old airplane. It doesn't have to be a complex airplane or anything. Simply calculate your pivotal altitude based on the speed that airplane cruises at and what the winds are doing aloft that day. Find two pylons and go out and practice to your heart's content. Make sure that you're choosing a good area to practice in, though, not around people's houses or things like that, since you're probably going to be below 1,000 feet AGL. If you have any questions on this maneuver at all, go ahead and leave them in the comments below or in our Commercial Pilot Bootcamp forum online at fly8mikealpha.com, part of our Commercial Pilot Checkride Prep Bootcamp. Sign up for the Commercial Pilot Checkride Prep. I guarantee you will pass your Commercial Pilot Checkride first time. It has awesome examples of orals, checkrides, all sorts of things to prep you for your Commercial Pilot Checkride in there at fly8mikealpha.com. Check out some of our other online courses there. And as always, guys, if you can't fly every day, then fly8mikealpha.com. We will see y'all next time.